All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation today. My name is Jessica Fortner, and I am a senior consultant in workforce and education at TPMA. Our topic of the hour is K-12 education workforce pipelines. We're going to discuss specifically building effective partnerships. As we all know, the transition from classroom to career is more important than ever, so we're excited to share insights on successfully closing the gap between education and employment that ensures students graduate with real-world skills that employers need. So we have a great panel of experts here today, and I'm going to introduce them to you. So with that being said, Vince, would you briefly introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional background in K-12, workforce development, or strategic partnerships, and then we'll move on to the next person.
Very good. Thank you, Jess, and it's great to be with everyone. My name is Vince Bertram. I am currently an assistant professor of management at the University of Indianapolis, and this is one of those career transitions that I always thought I would do. I just didn't know when, but I spent 11 years as a CEO of a national education organization, Project Lead the Way, or PL2W, which many of you are familiar with. We ended up over 14,000 schools with millions of students participating in our program, all focused on workforce development, really, and preparing students for careers. And prior to that, I was an urban school superintendent in Evansville, Indiana, and I was a high school principal for 8 years. And my entire career has been focused on this very issue. How do we prepare K-12 students for great careers, and what does that look like from a workforce perspective? And that's where I spend my time today. And my last book was called Dream Differently, Candid Advice for America's Students. I rewrote that book post-COVID, thinking about the AI revolution as well as the COVID effect. And I got really creative with the title. It's called Dream Differently 2.0. Which I'm happy to share with anyone free of charge. So I'm not trying to sell a book, but my point is that my entire career has been focused on helping students prepare for great careers. And I'm looking forward to our panel today.
Thank you. All right, Joseph, our next guest is Joseph Moybon. Joseph, will you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Jess. My name is Joseph Moybon. I am the co-founder and COO of 220 Youth Leadership. We are a national education company, and our main focus is developing youth between the ages of 14 to 24 to make sure they are prepared for whatever life looks like for them. We also encourage students and youth to think bigger about what's possible for their future. And so we create programs, curriculum, and courses and install those into K-12 organizations, after-school programs, post-secondary institutions, as well as workforce development agencies.
Thank you. All right, and then we have Nyoka Clark.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Nyoka Clark, the Senior Director of Workforce Strategies with Ascend Indiana. Ascend Indiana is an initiative of the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, or CICP, and we have a really big focus on workforce development, but specifically around work-based learning. So we do a lot of work here in Indiana to support employers, especially in work-based learning and being able to take on high school students for different WBL experiences. And prior to Ascend, I was a high school educator for about 15 years. And then I was a workforce development consultant for about 4 years, working with organizations throughout the country to help them figure out and solve their talent development needs. So this is a big focus and a big passion of mine. Really, especially when I was in K-12 education, our big focus was what happens the Monday after graduation. And so just really excited to be part of this panel.
Thank you. We're super excited to have each one of you. And I did a little research on each of you, and I am excited to just hear what you have to say. All of you are very passionate, and that is what brings us all here today to talk and share expertise. So we will get started. If you are a viewer participating, feel free to put a question in the chat, and we will get to that as we go along. But we are going to designate some time at the end to stop and really look at the questions. So we will start with our very first question for our panelists, which is, what does an effective K-12 workforce pipeline look like? And then what are the key elements that make it successful? And Vince, I'll ask you to start us off, and then we'll just keep rolling through.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you really take a step back and look at the current setting in K-12 education. We prepare students through a series of courses, they get to the end, and then we ask them to make some of the most significant decisions of their lifetime, right? Whether to invest $100,000+ in going to college, whether they're going directly to the workforce. In reality, they just don't know what's possible. Okay, so for me, the ideal situation is that from the very early ages of our K-12 experiences, we're exposing students to the world of careers. Okay, we're helping them understand what a career is, and what's possible, how the content and the things they're learning in school is absolutely relevant to their careers. And I think it's that relevancy that we often lack in education. We teach math to teach math, and we teach third grade to get to fourth grade. We don't really impress upon our children how important the things they're learning are going to lead to lifetime outcomes. And I think the more exposure that we can give them, the more experiences we can give them, will help them make better decisions at that day after that Nyoka's talking about, because it's absolutely critical for our students. So I'm really an advocate of early career learning and embedding that experience throughout the K-12 education experience. And I know we're going to get into work-based learning a little bit later in this, but all of that ties together in helping students make informed decisions.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly, Vince. It's so important to make sure that that's embedded throughout a student's education journey. And one of the things that we've noticed over the last several years of working with different programs and schools and things like that are oftentimes the most successful or the most effective approach to this is when employers are at the table the whole way through, that they're a co-creator of a lot of this, whether it comes from career exploration activities, job shadowing, career advising, etc. The more employers are actively involved in this work, the more effective it tends to have the outcomes are for the students that go through it. So I think it's so incredibly vital to make sure that employers are not only at the table, but they are an active participant in all of this.
Agreed. And I think one of the things we see in our work around employer engagement is the employers actually need to come first. And we have to make sure that we understand what the employer's needs are, what their challenges are, what their goals are, and what some of the involvement opportunities look like, so they can understand how they can get involved. A lot of times when employers are looped into these conversations with nonprofit partners, they don't fully understand all of the opportunities that are at their disposal to contribute. And so I would even build on that a little bit to say employers should be at the table and be fully engaged, and the community should also be at the table and fully engage with those schools. So it really is those three legs of the stool, making sure that we all are coming together. We have a shared vision for what's possible, and there's mutual benefit for all three of those people to make sure that we understand how employers can benefit, how students can benefit, like we talked about, as well as how the community can benefit from these work-based learning, as well as some of these more modernized educational opportunities that we want to offer our young people.
Yeah, absolutely. Schools need to know that they don't need to shoulder this burden entirely on their own. That this is kind of a community effort.
Agreed.
That's good. That was a great segue, Joseph, because our next question, and you can maybe start us off with this and expound a little bit more. How can educators and industry collaborate to ensure students are graduating with workforce-ready skills?
So I do think it comes back to starting with employers. So if we want for students to graduate with workforce-ready skills, the best way to start on that journey is to understand what the employers are expecting from any employee they bring on, but especially the younger talent that our schools can be developing, really leveraging those partnerships and engagement opportunities to say, what are the things that you would need to bring on a young person, and how can we be a partner in that, in becoming potentially even like a talent pipeline for our local employer partnerships. So we do a lot of work in this space, and a lot of employers will tell you we will teach them the hard skills, but we need them to have these soft skills in place to effectively bring them on, but more importantly, to retain them, we need them to understand how to communicate and collaborate and be adaptable and deal with ambiguity. And so there's a lot of baseline skills that are transferable across any employer partner that schools can really be ear to the ground, understanding and asking questions about and thinking about how they can incorporate that into their work-based learning, but even into their own curriculum and learning opportunities for students during the school day. So I think it's an ongoing collaboration between schools and employers to understand how they can continue to provide students with the learning experiences that will help them be prepared for that first Monday after high school. I think that's such a good visual for us to think about, is how can we help them, no matter what their next step looks like, be prepared for that first Monday after they graduate.
Yeah, and I would piggyback on that. I also think employers can collaborate with schools when it comes to career advising as well. So oftentimes that falls solely on the guidance counselor, or maybe like a one-off meeting that they have with a career coach that gets brought in on a random Friday or something. But having employers actively collaborate with schools and with students on career advising is such a great way to expose students to a variety of careers and industries they wouldn't have known about otherwise, and to help students understand all of the different paths that are available. It's not like you choose this path or you choose this path to get to a career. There are so many intersecting ways to get to your destination, and being able to hear directly from an employer or directly from an industry and that career advising is so beneficial to students.
I would add two points to this. One is that systems have to be aligned to get the outcomes that we're really interested in. And too often we have disconnects throughout the K-12 education, higher ed, as well as the workforce. So Joseph pointed out, when you look at all the research on what employers are really looking for, and then you go back to the K-12 system, we don't really assess any of those skills. Okay? We test math or we test science, we'll test subject matter, but we don't necessarily assess the skills and help students understand, do they have the skill development they need to be successful in this? So if collaboration is really important, why aren't we absolutely focused on building collaborative skills and assessing those skills and giving students feedback on their ability to work in collaborative teams? Right? Same thing with problem solving, critical thinking, communication, collaboration. All those are critical skills that employers are looking for. The other point I would make is that we need this to be a more expansive view for students. Students shouldn't be relegated to their one community employer, and that's the only exposure they get. Okay? So we have to find technological solutions to this to really expose students to a much wider range of career paths. As Joachim made the point, there are all kinds of on-ramps and off-ramps throughout the career journey. But for those ramps to be open to you, you have to have skills. Okay? You have to have knowledge. And I think that's what happens throughout a career. Students just learn. They develop wisdom. They have experiences. They understand the kind of career paths that become available to them. And the question is, do they have the skills to actually pursue those careers? So the idea of this day after high school, I like that, right? But it doesn't start then, right? That's just everything you've done to make sure you're ready for that day that's just absolutely critical for our students.
Yeah, I agree. We have a question in the chat that I think might be good, and that is this individual was asking, is there a tool to assist with that on the employer connection side of things, to assist in articulating needs? Do you know of any tools?
I can give you one, right? I don't think, and I spent a lot of time looking at this. I think technology is going to be a solution for us. And I'm going to make a play here for Joseph in 220, because as I really started looking at their work, no one's doing anything better on work-based learning at scale than what they're creating right now. And I would really encourage people to take a look at that and what it can mean for high schools and the connectivity. I think it does address a common language, common skills, and give students a wide exposure to a wide range of work-based learning experiences. And because this is going to be a scale, when we think about equity in education, which is something I'm deeply passionate about, right? We don't not do something because it's going to be inequitable. We have to figure out how to make it equitable, right? And if work-based learning is important, students in rural communities and places around America where there just aren't a lot of employers, there aren't a lot of opportunities, despite our best efforts to engage them, do we want all of our students relegated to an experience that only includes one manufacturing facility somewhere in some community? I think that is highly inequitable. Right? So bringing the technological solution to this that exposes students to a wide range of careers across multiple industries is going to help not only those students, but help the communities in which those students can go be employed and have great career opportunities. So I would just make that, as I examine a lot of this, I just think we have something on the horizon here that could be a great solution for our students.
Thanks, Vince. I would add two things. One is, I think sometimes we overcomplicate things with career pathways because so many employers we talk to will say we just need them to have the soft skills and we'll teach them the hard skills. I mentioned that. And so I think it comes back to how are we teaching meta skills and how are we helping students learn how to learn? I was at an event last week that said in the 1950s, there was a 50-year learning cycle because you did one job, and if you learned how to do it, you didn't have to relearn it for a long time. But students today with AI and technology advancements and all the new tech that's coming out and relearning and reskilling, they're on more of a 6-month learning cycle of having to retool, relearn, better understand things. And so these meta skills around how do we help students understand self-management, how to teach themselves and how to teach themselves how to learn new skills is going to be even more important because once they get into their career, there's not that formal educational opportunity. And so we need to equip them with skills that will help them be receptive and responsive to all the new technology that's coming out. So I think thinking about meta skills, thinking about those soft skills, a lot of those are going to help build those career pathways. And then students can take that student-driven learning and tailor that to the career pathways that they're most interested in so they can build some of those advanced STEM skills or some of the advanced skills in entrepreneurship or other career pathway opportunities that they're excited about. So those are the two things I would add to just make sure that we're thinking about learning in a way that's going to help students beyond graduation, because beyond graduation from now until who knows when is going to look a lot different than it has in the past.
In my experience working with employers, especially employers who are looking to do work-based learning with high school students, we always hear, right? Oh, I just need somebody who knows how to work. I just need somebody who can show up and we'll teach them the hard skills, et cetera. So in my experience, when we have dived into those conversations with employers, oftentimes what comes out of that is the employer is not prepared to have a teenager working for them or being in their professional environment. And they're expecting this teenager to act the way you would expect somebody in their late 20s or early 30s to act who's been in a professional experience for a while. And so oftentimes it comes down to working with the employer and making sure they are fully aware of how to interact with having a high schooler in their space, and that this is a perfect opportunity to help that high school student develop some of those skills, because the way the student shows up in their classroom or at school when they're around their peers and things like that might be different than how they show up in a workplace. And employers need to be able to be prepared to kind of mentor and help students develop those skills. So that's not something solely that they have to develop in school, but something that they can also develop with an employer.
Thank you. Our fourth panelist is here. It's Marzell Brown. He's here. Marzell, would you like to introduce yourself? And I know you wanted to pipe in on this question, so we'll give you that chance too.
Yep, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Marzell Brown. I work over at Rockwell Automation. I'm in the what we call our education organization for Rockwell, where we are charged every day with making sure our next generation of critical thinkers and technicians and engineers are learning the right technologies and have the right tools in front of them, not just from our products, but from our partners as well. And I've been there 26 years now at Rockwell, and spent a lot of time on the tech side of the world in the last few years, running a high school intern program for our business, where we do bring in, starting after 10th grade, students that we want to keep until they graduate from college, and running those types of programs, and now helping high schools and colleges and community centers with what that looks like from a technology. We talk about being on the industry side of things. You're absolutely right. In Ohio, at least, there's a huge push around career technical education, and which allows for schools to have a variety of career tech pathways, but those pathways are required to have advisory boards. And that's just not one company or one person from the company. There's a bunch of advisory board input to make sure that those opportunities are meaningful and rich. Capstones are real big for them to make sure that the technology is spread around and not just in one silo, so that things like AI, for example, or cloud or autonomous robots or things of that nature in our world, at least. I'm not talking ag or culinary or anything like that, but talking on the tech side of things. That is really important, and so we want to make sure that they get those opportunities. And then we do things like Manufacturing Day and STEM days with the Cavs and the Guardians and things like that, where it gives students exposure to all the different technologies. And that's not about economic, at that point either. So you're right, Vince, about how do you break down those barriers around the socioeconomic issues, or just being in a space where you're not sure what an engineer does or what somebody in a certain field does. You want to remove those barriers, and we try our best to do that. So Jess, thanks for having me here on your panel.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. I think this next question really kind of leads into what we've been discussing about equity. And the question is, what are the biggest barriers preventing students from accessing workforce opportunities? And we've kind of discussed them a bit, but let's talk about it a little bit more, maybe at a granular level. And then how should leaders address those challenges, whether it's in education or employers? How can we address those barriers that we see? And Nayoka, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So I think by far the greatest barrier to being able to engage in a work-based learning experience like this is transportation, at least here in Indiana, because we have so many schools that exist in rural communities where the closest employer is several miles away. Getting access to a variety of employers is really, really challenging. So transportation by far is one of the number one barriers, and kind of a way to address that. I've seen more employers starting to lean into virtual work-based learning opportunities with students. Also starting to see a huge uptick here in Indiana of like school-based enterprises or other school-based work-based learning that brings an employer into the school, still helps to build those really critical skills, but the students don't have to leave their building in order to access it. So I think transportation definitely. Number two is paid internships and paid experiences. If a student has to commit a significant amount of time, especially if they have to travel and they have to fund their own travel to and from that experience, not being paid for that creates a significant barrier and makes it really, really challenging for students to access those opportunities.
I would add to that. I certainly think geography is a major barrier, right? But we create major barriers. We haven't changed the structure of school in 150 years, right? Like why is high school 4 years, 8 semesters? Well, we could finish high school in 3 years very easily. Why could we just take a whole year and say this is going to be work-based learning, and you don't have all the scheduling conflicts, right? You have students who can't even get to a career center because they have to stay at their home school to take and repeat an English course that they didn't get at their high school. Some people are doing a really good job of facilitating that, but we could recreate some structures that facilitate work-based learning in a much more effective way than we are today. right? We have to think about the systems and the structures that will allow this to happen, right? Transportation is an issue, right? Busing is an issue if you're trying to schedule in a 60-minute class period in the middle of the day. Yes, it's going to be a challenge for anyone. But how do we eliminate some of those constraints, right? In business, that's where we would start, right? How do you eliminate these constraints? How do you manage them? How do you restructure in a way to allow us to do this? And I think we have to do the same thing in K-12 education. And if we do, some of these barriers could be at least mitigated than we're experiencing right now.
The challenges we hear, though, are on the same from the employer side. So even in one of our urban district partnerships, they have a strong employer relationship, and that employer is only able to offer 5 spots at the most for student work-based learning experiences. So it presents a challenge from the employer side, and as a small business owner, it's overwhelming to think about how would we, as someone who is a big fan of work-based learning, provide more than a few spots to students in our community to make it a really engaging and impactful experience. Like we talked about, employers are not typically ready to take on a high school student or may not have the system set up in order to make that an effective experience. So to me, I think employer availability is another big challenge that we're hearing schools are running into. Is even if they are in a more urban setting, there's a lot of competition in that urban setting that are trying to work with those employers and drum up internships and work-based learning experiences. And then the other piece that's challenging is we're focused on career pathways and helping students identify what life can look like after high school. But a lot of students don't have the industry variety in their community to access a career pathway or a work-based learning that's focused on that pathway. So I do think there's a lot of challenges from the school side, but as we think about the employers as well, there's a lot of things on their end that would have to get reorganized in order to meet the work-based learning need at scale, with so many states that are now requiring it as part of graduation, or workforce boards that are encouraging apprenticeships, pre-apprenticeships, work-based learning with their local employer. So I think there are some other challenges there from the employer side that we still have to figure out as well.
Hey, Jess, this isn't a plug for Ohio, but a lot of those things you guys talked about, we don't run into those as much here in Ohio. I give a shout out to Magnet here in Northeast Ohio. We run a program in collaboration with Magnet called Early College, Early Career, where they provide that transportation for those high school interns door to door every day of the summer for every last one of those interns to those employers to remove that barrier of transportation. We also have a lieutenant governor that had put some energy behind paying for those internships. So there's a certain dollar amount to a certain cap. Now I want to misspeak on the number, but it's covered. So employers don't feel that burden of one, getting them there, and then Magnet and other organizations like that will take those students out of class during the school year to prepare them for those summer internships. And it's mandatory they make those. They don't make those, and that kind of sets the understanding that this person probably won't be a good intern if they can't make this once a week commitment. And then the school districts are mandating career exploration starting at least 6th grade to try to get that variety of careers. And it's not just focused in one area. And so folks could look at some of those plans that were put in play. And we've been doing that for years now, where they have hundreds and hundreds of students that are at not just the big companies, but at some of these mid and small size companies around our region. And because of that, those opportunities around transportation, because the governor has supported us financially to date, not sure what will happen in the future, but those are things that have helped remove those barriers in these communities. And I'm a product of those communities myself personally. And so, we're really intentional on how you continue to remove those barriers. So, and digitally, some of those virtual experiences are needed as well. So to be able to put a VR set on and be in an operating room, or put a VR set on and operate a robot or something like that, students would never not be able to get all those experiences. So you can bring some of those to the classroom as well as in classroom time.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat specific to this question, and it says, how do manufacturers get over the barrier of hiring students under 18 years of age? Our state allows it, but insurance companies and lawyers are the main barrier, especially at large corporations. Does anyone on the panel have any input or expertise in that?
Yeah, so in my experience, being able to connect a manufacturer to another manufacturer who has figured it out is often the best, because they're able to share, this is the question we asked, this is how we posed it to our insurance company, etc. I will say, in my experience, the problem isn't with insurance companies. Usually when you go and you make the ask, or if you sit down and you kind of talk through it with the insurance company, you quickly find out that yes, under 18 is covered by the policies because they are hired. They are an employee of the manufacturer. What typically comes down to, it's either your lawyers, if you have a law department in your organization, or it's your upper level management who are using insurance as kind of a barrier. So just kind of being able to open up that transparency really, really helps, being able to ask those questions. But again, in my experience, the most effective way is to be able to partner them with another manufacturer.
I agree. I agree with you. You know, here in Northeast Ohio, the Swagelocks, the Lincolns, the Timkins, the Rockwells, we all hire students under 18 in those plants, right? And so you're absolutely right. It's about connecting them with folks that have done it, have figured it out, and then that anxiety is removed. I know in the first year for us, they were telling us we couldn't hire folks that weren't 18, but we hire them all the time. And there's some really interesting success stories out of those too. So to be able to connect those would be really the right way to do it. I totally agree.
Thank you. I think we had some comments in the chat just supporting what both of you had contributed. So great. Our next question, going back to work-based learning, which, to be honest, I wish I would have had that when I was in high school. I would have benefited from that tremendously. But what role does work-based learning play into student success, and how can we ensure competitive wages for students participating, whether it's an internship, apprenticeship, or other workforce things? So tell us about this, why, how does it play into student success? Marzell, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, we work-based learning is really important because, you know, for us, and it is, and we're really sensitive to out of classroom work-based learning experiences, because there is a little thing you can do it in classroom if you can simulate the work environment, because it may be too far away or something like that. But it gets them in an environment that shows them what it's going to look like if they're deciding to go down that pathway. Some of the, you know, we demystify some of the things that they're like, oh, I didn't realize that was an option, you know, or wow, it is a little more laid back than I thought. And here, but we also try to make sure they get meaningful work, not some busy work, and put them to the test. Because again, in our area, they have to do so many hours of work-based learning to even meet their career tech criteria. So they're so, you know, with 3 weeks coming up here soon, where I got a bunch of folks doing work-based learning, it is hands-on in those environments so that they can understand what they're getting themselves into if they decide to go down those paths. And it's not just hardcore manufacturing for us. We put them in engineering roles. We put them with our IT folks. We put them all over the place on purpose, right? Just so they can get an idea that it's not just one vertical. Because our off-ramps, to somebody's point, I don't know if it was Joseph or Vince, earlier, the off-ramps are right to work, to apprenticeship programs, or to 2- and 4-year institutions, all out of the same pathway. So we want to make sure all those options are available to them so they can see them.
Yeah, and a couple of things I'll add to this. First of all, with Marzell and his work, I mean, Rockwell is, you know, a model of excellence around this work, right? And I think we can learn a lot from Marzell's leadership and what Rockwell has done over the years. You know, but when I look at K-12 education and the pathway at that age level, right, moving students into something beyond high school, I can't help but think about the preparation that we provide for student athletes. right? They get to practice all the time. They play games, they get feedback, they develop skills. I can't imagine a college or university recruiting someone who's never played the game before, right? Like, just come here and we'll teach you how to play the game. As long as you are a good teammate, you're fine, right? The reality is you are looking for skills. You're looking for people who can do that. The same thing outside. I mean, think about even schools of music or going into some profession in music. It's all about your preparation in the years leading up to that. You don't just choose to do that. But then all other careers, we just kind of leave to chance. Right? Like for children who don't believe they're good at mathematics, what's the likelihood of them pursuing a career that requires mathematics? Right? They just avoid these things. We turn off so many students to experiences and careers based on what they think they're good at or not good at a very early age. Okay? And I think by exposing them to careers and gaining interest in something, it could also increase the relevancy of what they're learning in school, right? Because they will understand that math matters, right? Not just to take a test at the end of a school year, but this is something that could lead you to the career path that you're really interested in. So I think we can rethink some of that and really help move students and giving them work-based experiences, real work experiences as early as possible.
Vince, I completely agree with that. I think that is by far the most valuable aspect of work-based learning. Oftentimes when people think about work-based learning, they assume like you're just training a kid for this one specific job, right? You're building up a pipeline for this specific employer. And that's not it. It's exactly what Vince said. It's about that practice, that exposure to different careers, different occupations, different employers, but also that ability to just learn how to be a professional in a professional environment, being able to expand your network because you get to meet all of these other people and hear their journeys and how they got to where they are. I hear from employers all the time who do work-based learning about the incredible student stories of interns or apprentices that they bring on that discover a career path they never would have thought was available to them. There's one employer here in Indianapolis who tells a story. They have an HR apprentice who's been with them since she was a junior in high school. And through her work in that apprenticeship, developed a real passion. And now she's going to school to become an employment lawyer because she developed a real passion to be able to support employees in their work and in their workplace. She never would have thought that was an option. She didn't even know that was a career path for her. And I think that is just such truly the really valuable aspect of work-based learning.
Last thing I would add there is I think work-based learning fills in the gaps of what a career readiness class or program can offer a student. So the curriculum may be great and may teach all these key principles, and we're a curriculum and course company, and we try to build the best products we can for schools and for students to be engaging and teach them real world skills. But there are still going to be gaps when they get to that first day of work or when they encounter a tough situation. One of the apprentice programs we work with here in Chicago shared, and this was a 21-year-old, but shared that at the first happy hour, they were offered a drink and they didn't know what to do. They were like, do I take that because everyone else is drinking, or do I pass on that because I'm trying to be professional? And so it fills in gaps on things that we can't predict. And it also provides students with that feedback loop because it's not just a job, it's work-based learning where they have an opportunity to get feedback and ask questions about the things that are happening on the job. And so it really provides that experiential opportunity that they otherwise may not get to make sure that that job that they have when they do leave high school, they're ready for, they've encountered different situations and they are prepared to be successful. And they've done that through exposure as well as through the skill development.
Great. That was great input from everybody. Before we move on to our next question, there is a question in the chat that I think would be good to kind of bring in here. How would you describe the role of economic development organizations in the role of career exploration and awareness to students?
I think it's critical. I think it's critical engagement, right? And early on, we heard from, Joseph and Yoka around just, the people who need to be at the table. And I would bring anyone who's interested in workforce development, economic growth, to be at the table, right? To be an active participant. When we are trying to attract business, expand businesses within communities, one of the primary factors will be workforce, right? And education, and showing that collaboration and that intentionality, I think is absolutely critical. So I would not in any way ignore or keep people from economic development outside of those discussions. I would make them core to the discussion.
Yeah, I agree. And often one of the barriers employers express to us, preventing them from participating in work-based learning, is because they get all of these one-off requests from schools. This school comes to them and like, hey, can you take on this intern here in 2 months? And this other school is like, hey, can you take on these 5 who are on a wildly different schedule? And it really gets overwhelming for those employers. So having an organization in the community, the Economic Development Corporation, like, would be perfect example of that. But having some entity in a community that can bring these employers together, bring those schools together, and be kind of that bridge and help really expand and develop that system so employers aren't feeling overwhelmed with all of these asks, is a really, really great way to do that. And like Vince said, really embedding themselves into this ecosystem and understanding how it works. What is the ask from schools? What is the ask from the state? What is the ask of employers? And being able to help bridge all of those gaps is so incredibly important.
Or just creating the system within a community to facilitate this work, right? It's not who has the lead, create the system for it, right? It's exactly what we've done with economic development in general, right? We create economic development arms to drive economic growth in our communities, right? And we're doing that. And then, education has a responsibility, workforce has a responsibility, but someone has to manage and facilitate this whole ecosystem, right? And I think creating those systems that will allow this to work seamlessly, where you don't have one-offs, but you have a systems that work, I think could be really critical for communities. Which is what you're doing, Yoka, right?
Yeah, it's a big part of what we do at Ascend, is kind of
what
help
you do.
build and develop those systems. Yep.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll move on to our next question. Can you discuss state initiatives or policies that have been particularly effective in encouraging employers to bring students into the workplace? Kind of as we've already discussed, every state does it similarly and differently, calls it different things. Can you share something that that's been effective?
Yeah, like I spoke earlier, we have a initiative where part of their summer salaries are covered for those employers, which is an incentive for the employer to help right in that space. And they also have a called tech cred, where they will reimburse for training. And so those things have been effective. We also have a bunch of grants in the state that have allowed for schools to explore these career areas that they would not have been able to do without the support from the state level. And then the articulation agreements with our 2- and 4-year institutions are in place that help ease some of that transition between. And so that forces all of them to be talking to each other. And then I get, not just me, but a lot of industry will get those inquiries from not just the schools at the high school level, but those 2 and 4 years, asking about what are you looking at for employees, not just today, but 5 years down the road as well. And so they're trying to help plan. And so those initiatives have been successful. At least in our state here, has been successful. I don't know nationally what that looks like, but those are just a handful that we've seen at work, and having people like those economic developers and our MEPs around the regions that support those districts. And then our STEM ecosystems are really strong in Ohio as well. So they all play in that pond of helping make sure careers are there. Right, we just saw, I don't know how many thousand students last Sunday on career exploration, K-12 with the Indians, with the Cavs, right? And then we do that with Manufacturing Day with 1,000 here, and we've spun up some more in the summer. So those are some of the initiatives that are in our state that are working well.
Thank you.
Here in Indiana, we have what's called Earn and Learn, which is a really great funding source to help provide funding to employers to cover the cost of taking on a high school intern or a high school apprentice. So like cover the salary that you would pay for those interns or those apprentices. So that's a really great program that a lot of employers don't know about or don't know how to tap into. Indiana, a couple of years ago, also established what's called a career scholarship account, or a CSA, which gives a student a $5,000 stipend their sophomore, junior, and senior year. So it renews every year, that employers can invoice to help cover some of the training cost associated with work-based learning experiences. So a couple initiatives here in Indiana to kind of help support employers to be able to make more of them say yes. And then Indiana just passed a bunch of new high school graduation requirements that go into effect for next year's freshman class. And one of the big focuses of these new requirements is to make it easier for more students to have time in their schedule to be able to participate in work-based learning. And there's some new requirements in there around hours related to work-based learning. So we are anticipating to seeing an increase in the number of students looking for these opportunities because of that new requirement.
Yeah, I think there are people who talk about it and there are people who do it, right? And I think we have two representatives on this panel that are really the epitome of getting things done, right? As I look across the country, over 30 states have enacted work-based learning into their state accountability rules. And there are a lot of people who believe this is important, but creating the systems for it and taking bold action is very different. And I would point to the work in Ohio, and I think what's happening in Indiana right now is very exciting. I think systems are coming around, but the idea of how do you align K-12 with work-based learning and the future of work, right? And thinking about graduation requirements and how are they aligned with this to support this effort, that they're not in contradiction, right? And that's a critical piece. So I think those are two places I would look very closely at and see what they're doing. And I would encourage other states to really start to align systems around this important effort.
One other idea to throw in, not a state initiative, but a city initiative, is we are based in Chicago, and there's an initiative called Everyone Can Code. And so it is a initiative between the city of Chicago and Apple, where Apple provides developers and their employees as resources to high school students to teach them how to code in their operating system language. And then high school students across the city are then working with Apple. They're developing apps that solve a problem in their school or their community. And then they're presenting at a big showcase at the Apple store on Michigan Avenue to basically solidify and get potential funding for their ideas. So this is providing a talent pipeline for Apple. It's helping them get invested in a community where they have a presence, but it's not like Apple's headquartered here. So it's just another creative way to think about how we can connect the dots to provide employers with opportunities to engage with our students, as well as get students interested in what it is that they're learning about and how they can continue to solidify that learning through project-based learning, social impact projects, as well as getting involved with companies that they're interested in and that they care about.
Thanks. So we're at close to 10 minutes, and I think I've kept up with all of the questions in the chat, and I see some networking going on, which is great. I do see a question. It is my understanding that students participating in the CSAs takes income away from the school system. I'm not sure exactly if there's any context that you need, the panelists need that.
No, so the idea was when the CSAs were first announced here in Indiana that it would come from the same bucket as the career and technical education dollars that schools receive, but they're actually two separate funding streams.
Thank you. All right, that was a quick answer. That's easy. All right, so we'll end this with what words of wisdom for our panelists, what words of wisdom do you have for our audience members if they're in the beginning stages of, building effective partnerships?
I'll jump in and just maybe start with a couple. The first would be what we started with, which is start with your employers and really try to better understand. Yoka talked about them really being an engaged partner in the work. I think that's so important. Starting with the employers in mind and understanding what their needs are, their challenges are, and their goals are will help you develop really strong relationships with them and help your students be more successful when they do participate in those work-based learning or apprenticeship or internship experiences. It can really inform the work that you're doing, whether you're a local workforce board or an economic development corporation or a K-12 institution. And the second is Vince touched on this, but focusing on building those real world modern skills in students and really thinking about how we can make that part of our K-12 culture, teaching them those meta skills, those soft skills, those adaptability skills that will help them thrive, knowing that their career path is going to change. How can we teach them those skills that will be effective and support them no matter what direction they go? And so teaching those transferable skills in the K-12 during the school day is going to be a critical piece of work-based learning to ensure that students are successful in that first job and as well as throughout their career.
I echo what Joseph's saying, and those partnerships are important, right? And so finding the right industry partners in that region, getting your I don't know what you want to call all of your MEPs when it's not just manufacturing, but you want to find those hubs and they can help you get connected in your region. We've done that a lot in Ohio. I mean, I sit in an area where we represent Rockwell across the country, the globe. And so there are all these different pockets, and you're absolutely right, Vince. There are some areas that are doing it well and others that need some help. And so, but partnering with those other extensions in your community will help bridge the gap with that industry need too. So just don't overlook that. And then we've also found that our community places like science centers and museums are out of school places that also are looking and are connected with those partners. So don't forget them, and you can leverage places like that as well. I know the Great Lakes Science Center here in Cleveland and COSI and Columbus are two really big ones that are in that space also.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. My greatest piece of advice is to start in partnership. Don't try to do this alone. If you're an employer who's looking to get into this space, find other employers in your industry who are also ready to take this leap and work together to develop a plan. Employers oftentimes tend to think like, well, what I do is so different and so unique. I couldn't possibly work with another employer. You can when it comes to work-based learning and developing an occupation that students can do during their experience or figure out what those skills are that they can do. You don't have to figure that out on your own. You can work with other people in your industry, and that's often where the magic happens. If you're a school, you don't need to do this in a silo. We've mentioned a few times now, there are so many community partners out there who are ready and willing and able to step up and help you navigate this space for your students, help you figure out how to talk to employers. Feel free to work with other schools. You don't have to feel like you're in competition with your fellow school districts to try and get your students placed. You can come together and kind of build out this ecosystem. So again, my greatest piece of advice is start in partnership.
Yeah. Last thing I'll share is that this is transformational. It's not transactional. Right? And it really needs to be, we need to think about this as a systems approach and an ecosystem. No business survives on their own, right? Every business relies on a supply chain and partners, right? Customers, right? I was working with a large company, and it was not Rockwell at this time, but it was another company. And the CEO said to me, "Why should we make this kind of investment? We get all the engineers we need." And we were helping train engineers. And my response was that if you're only doing this for yourself and the number of engineers you need, then don't do it. If you're helping 1,500 suppliers across a global supply chain get the engineers they need and the students into these kind of careers, then you should absolutely do it. Right? It wasn't just about them. It was about their entire ecosystem, their entire supply chain, the hubs, and everything that had been created around their business units, right, to supply them. Right? So this is much broader than an individual employer. The other is last couple of points on students themselves. I think one, we have to continue to focus on exposure. I think it's unfair to students to only give them access to one particular career path. Right? We need to help them see multiple career paths, and any industry can do that. Right? Even if they're focused on one thing or producing one product, they have suppliers, they have customers that have very diverse needs, right? That they can help students understand what that looks like, and then focus on skills. Okay? Really helping students develop the skills they need, not just how to weld, for instance, but how to think and how to collaborate and communicate effectively. I think those are the kind of skills that are going to help students really thrive in their careers. So this has been very good. I really appreciate hearing from everyone.
Thank you to Nyoka, Vince, Marzel, and Joseph. We appreciate your time, and to all of our participants, please feel free, to we're going to put my email in the chat. I think it's already there. The recording of this webinar will be posted on our website and available to you with our archive of other webinars. We have a webinar series we do, and if you're interested in collaborating, we love to do this kind of work at TPMA, build bridges and help get infrastructure in place to support people. So thank you very much to everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.